Okay, we are in Daniel chapter 11. We're going to officially start in verse 18. As we do, just by way of a quick summary of what's happening here. Daniel 11 is one of the most detailed, if not the most detailed prophecy in the entire Bible. Certainly the most details packed into one chapter of anywhere in the Bible. It outlines the history of the Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Empire. If you were to look on a map, and we did show a map last week, the Seleucid Empire would be north of Israel. The Ptolemaic Empire would be in Egypt, which is south of Israel. These were remnants of Alexander the Great's empire. When Alexander conquered the whole known world at the time, he actually stopped at the gates of India. He got that far. He died relatively soon after his conquests, and his empire went into civil war. His four generals fought it out, and then they ended up, after 40 years, dividing the empire into four geographic regions, four separate mini empires. Two of them were particularly important because, again, the Seleucid Empire, north of Israel, the Egyptian or Ptolemaic Empire, south of Israel, were obviously tremendously politically and governmentally important to the Jews because they were the world powers surrounding them now. Chapter 11, a great deal of chapter 11 discusses decades and centuries of history, of warfare, and political intrigue between this northern empire, the Seleucid Empire, we know it by the kings of the north in Daniel 11, and this southern empire, Egypt, or the Ptolemaic Empire, kings of the south. Daniel, well in advance, predicts all of the warfare and political intrigue between these two empires. And he predicts even more than that. We'll get into that today. But we've covered many years and many different kings and interactions between the north and south. We've come up to verse 18 and follow up on verse 17. I just want to make a historical correction. Last week we talked about the king of the north giving his daughter to marry the king of the south. Now, the king of the south at that point was Ptolemy V. And he was 7 years old at the time. We don't know how old the king of the north's daughter was. The king of the north is Antiochus III the Great. But you know that kings would marry off their daughters to foreign kings because that would give them influence over that other nation and an alliance with that other nation. So this is what the attempt was. The name of his daughter was Cleopatra, but to correct what might have been historical inaccuracy last time, that Cleopatra is not the world-famous Cleopatra that we know of. You all know the Cleopatra who was the consort of Mark Antony in Egypt under the Roman Empire. This Cleopatra was actually about 100 to 140 years before that famous Cleopatra, and she was an ancestor of the famous Cleopatra. She had been married off to the southern kingdom by the northern king in hopes that he would gain influence over the southern king. But in the end, she actually ended up doing things that favored the southern kingdom. Now, this brings us to verse 18. After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands, and shall take many, but a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Now, remember last week as we were reading through these verses, I had my notes in my hand. Because for every verse, you've got that there's a new king. You know? So the king we're talking about here is Antiochus III the Great, the one who had sent his daughter down to the south. Right? These verses refer to an attack he made on Greece. But he was defeated twice and the second time he was notably defeated by a Roman general named Scipio. He then returned to his own land after he was defeated, to the Seleucid Empire up north. And he was killed trying to plunder a particular temple. So he didn't die in battle, but he died as he was trying to raid the treasury of a temple to a god named Bel, B-E-L. So this 18 and 19 describe his foray into Greece, his loss there, and then his death as he had returned home and was trying to raid the loot at a particular temple. Verse 20. There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So here's what this verse is telling us. In the place of the North King, who just was killed trying to raid the temple of Bel, there was another king. His name was Seleucus IV Philopator. And he had a tax collector named Heliodorus. And famously, the king of the north, Seleucus, was faced with a Roman Empire who was dominating him at the time. And he was forced to pay tribute to Rome. Now, when you pay tribute to Rome, or a country that dominates you, it means that each year or at regular intervals, you just have to provide them a certain amount of money, no matter how you get it. The money you pay is designed to keep you relatively weak because so much of your treasury has to go to them, which ensures that their dominance lasts. So he's out there looking for loot, looking for money, because he owes Rome all this money or he's in big trouble. So he sends out Heliodorus, his tax collector, and he begins to levy heavy taxes on his people. Heliodorus actually goes down to Israel, and he begins to plunder the Jewish temple for money as well. Within a few days, it says, Seleucus would be broken, the king. Soon after Heliodorus was dispatched, Seleucus mysteriously died, and he probably died from poisoning by Heliodorus himself, the tax collector. So we see in these very obscure verses about tax collectors and kings that there was a historical event that matches up exactly with what Daniel predicted. Verse 21. And in his place shall arise a vile person, to whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Enter Antiochus IV Epiphanes. Seleucus IV is dead, probably poisoned by Heliodorus. Antiochus IV will eventually rise to power. Let me tell you a little bit of the story of this man named Antiochus. Antiochus was the brother of Seleucus, the king who had been poisoned. He was not in line for the throne. Seleucus' son, Demetrius, would have been in line. You know, kings give it to not to their brothers, they give it to their sons. However, remember that Roman influence that we've been discussing? Rome was dominating the Seleucid Empire. Well, as part of their domination, what they had done was called taking hostages. And they took some of the royal folks over to Rome. This was another way of making sure the countries you were dominating didn't rise up against you. Because the king may have his son hostage in Rome. Right? So if this king's going to attack Rome, well, his son's going to be killed. Demetrius was held captive in Rome at this time, Seleucus' son. So he couldn't be king. Seleucus also had a baby son who was still in the Seleucid Empire. But because he was a baby, Antiochus, Seleucus' brother, not in line to be king, said, you know what? I will be king in the place of this baby until this baby grows up to be king. Right? How noble, right? And we know where this is going. Right? We know where this is going. Through a series of intrigues, including local support of king, the support of a local king, he assumed the throne. And Seleucus's baby was tragically, as you can expect, murdered. In all likelihood, at the order of Antiochus. So now Antiochus has no competition for the throne. Demetrius is off in Rome. Seleucus's baby son is no more. Antiochus has the throne. He's a vile person, we read. And we're going to find out that that could not be more true. Antiochus IV Epiphanes turns out to be one of the historically great persecutors of the Jewish nation. He treats them horrifically. And as the verses unfold, we'll see what his story is and what he does to the Jews. So let's go to verse 22, With the force of a flood, they shall be swept away from before him and be broken. And also the prince of the covenant. The force of a flood. When Antiochus takes the kingship, he begins a series of military conquests, like a flood, right? Including against Egypt, the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom had made some encroaches on the northern kingdom's territory. Antiochus went to take it back. And he was successful. And he actually marched into Egypt. He actually made 2 major incursions into Egypt. This is the first one. And he was successful at dominating Egypt. Also says, very interestingly and very cryptically, the prince of the covenant will be swept away and broken. Different interpretations of what that means. I'm going to give you the one that I have certainly read, and it might be, I think it's probably true. Antiochus, as king of the Seleucid Empire, was now ruling over Israel, what we would call Israel. You all know about the high priests in Israel? The high priest at the time was a man named Onias, O-N-I-A-S. He was a legitimate high priest. Antiochus deposed him. He said, nope, you can no longer be high priest. Because Onias' brother, Jason, offered Antiochus a whole bunch of money if he would make him high priest. The high priest was a position from which you could extract money from the Jewish temple and the Jewish people. And he said, you know what, make me high priest and I'll be sure you get paid for this, Antiochus. So Antiochus stepped down Onias and placed Jason in the office of high priest. Now, we're going to find out, actually history tells us, that in the end, Antiochus will actually kill Onias. So this sweeping away the Prince of the Covenant. The Prince of the Covenant may be a title referring to the high priest. And he swept away the legitimate high priest and then in the end had him killed. So that is one good possibility of what this reference to the Prince of the Covenant is. Now, by way of history, Jason bought the high priesthood, right? He said, hey, I'll give you money for it. Well, this guy came along named Menelaus, and he offered Antiochus even more money to be the high priest. So Antiochus deposed Jason and installed Menelaus. Now, Menelaus was very faithful because Menelaus was not of the lineage of the Levites. He was not a Levite, and he was not an Aaronite. Do you know what I mean by that? He was not from the tribe of Levi.
He was from the tribe of Aaron.
And he was not from the family of Aaron. So he was not a legitimate high priest, right? Because to be a priest, you had to be a Levite and from the tribe of Aaron. This was potentially the first time that I know of in history, although perhaps it had happened before, but a very famous time where suddenly the priesthood is not legitimate. And you remember Onias? He was still alive at this time, and he was mad. He was very mad. And he raised up a revolt. As a result, Antiochus killed Onias. And that's how Onias died, trying to defend the priesthood from defilement, according to the Mosaic law. Verse 23. I'm going to read a couple of verses here. After the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province. And he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches. And he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. This is a reference to Antiochus's battle with Ptolemy VI Philometor. Remember Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic Empire in the south, Egypt? This is the current king of Egypt. And of course, the northern kings and southern kings, they just have to battle it out. They never stop fighting. So, there are exchanges between the Seleucids and the Egyptians, the north and the south. Antiochus along the way would make some agreements which he would later break. He would not honor the agreements he'd made. Most notably, he would initially defeat the king of the south, Ptolemy VI. But he would allow him to remain as a puppet king because Rome was out there. And so he couldn't just walk into Egypt, take the whole thing himself, and even though I believe he actually was declared king of Egypt, he could not actively rule over it because Rome would say no. Rome is now a third player in this whole thing, and they are dictating a lot of the terms. However, he does defeat the king of the south, Ptolemy, makes him a puppet king. And then he buys a bunch of allies by dispersing the loot from the battles. Notice that it said he distributes the booty among all of these people he wants alliances with. Right? So he did do that. Verse 25. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the kings of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So as we mentioned, Antiochus defeated the forces of Ptolemy VI, the Egyptian king. Ptolemy had actually been appealed to for help by the supporters of Onias. Remember Onias? The high priest who tried to rebel against Menelaus and then was killed. Well, he had supporters out there, and they're reaching out to Ptolemy. In response, Antiochus counterattacked with a smaller force. However, Ptolemy was actually betrayed into Antiochus's hands by some of his close advisors, right? It says right here. He was actually betrayed. And thus, Antiochus defeated him, even with a smaller force. Verse 27, both these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. Now, Alexandria, a city in Egypt, in the south, it held out against Antiochus. Antiochus had actually defeated the king, right? Ptolemy VI, he defeated him. But there was another Ptolemy. This is getting very confusing. Just know there's another Ptolemy. Actually, let me give you his name because yeah, we need a chart and a map, right? Ptolemy VIII Physcon, whose nickname was Fat Belly, right? So the other Ptolemy is Fat Belly. He is a holdout king in Alexandria. The people of Alexandria are fending off the king of the north, Antiochus. And they made this other Ptolemy, fat belly, king. So Antiochus makes an agreement with the first Ptolemy, Ptolemy the sixth. Hey, let's get fat belly, right? So they go through all these battles, right? And they are negotiating with each other. Antiochus and Ptolemy the sixth against fat belly, right? But these are all deceitful negotiations, right? Both of them have plans, right? In the end, they do defeat fat belly. Ptolemy the sixth kind of comes back into power, but Antiochus is going to invade Egypt again. So this idea that they're negotiating, like it says, at the same table, but doing it very deceitfully. Right? Everybody wants to be the boss, and they'll do anything they will do anything actually to be king. What do they say? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
How come none of these names are in here?
Because Daniel, when the angel reveals it to Daniel, the only descriptor he gets is king of the north and king of the south. The angel specifically does not give names. It's only when you look back on history and realize that every king of the north and south maps exactly onto what happened. So we can look back and see it was dramatically accurate. And it's a good chance to maybe step back for a second, because I had been thinking about this a little bit. Well, why didn't God give Daniel a very specific names, dates, right? Daniel had wanted to know the future of his people. The angel is going to reveal cryptically exactly what would happen to his people, right? And then really talk about the end times. But from what Daniel learns, you can take this general idea, even in Daniel's day, of what was going to happen to his people, which is really what the revelation was to him. God's purpose in giving the revelation to us is that now we have the wow factor. Right? Now we look back on history and say, well, not only did you give Daniel insight into what his people were going to experience, and Daniel could say, okay, I kind of generally know this is going to happen. But now we can look back, and it happened in such astonishing detail that no one in the world can deny that God gave it to him. So it strengthens our faith, even though we're long past most of the historical stuff here. We're going to get to, and it's coming up pretty quickly, passage in Daniel 11 that does not talk about history. It talks about future for us. And we'll get there in a minute. So Antiochus ends up going home, regathers an army, and is going to besiege Egypt again. Verse 28. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. So he shall do damage and return to his own land. On his way home, if Antiochus is in Egypt, and he's going to go home, get that army, come back, attack Fat Belly. If he goes north, where does he have to go? He has to go through Israel. Right now, he's in charge of Israel at this point. His empire extends down there. He's got to travel through it. He stops along the way in Jerusalem. Remember his boy Menelaus, the high priest who he installed? He recruits Menelaus to help him levy a tax on the Jews. Right? So he's beginning to oppress the Jews financially now. That financial oppression is going to turn to violent oppression within several years. But initially, he's beginning to levy heavy tax burdens on the people. He's got the ally in the high priesthood, right? Menelaus himself holds the office. 29. Actually, before we go on to 29, a historical point. Fat Belly, you all remember Fat Belly? Antiochus is going north to gather an army to come back and attack Fat Belly. Remember Antiochus's formerly defeated king but now ally, Ptolemy the Sixth? Fat Belly has defeated Ptolemy VI. Remember the two, Ptolemy VI and Antiochus were going to attack Fat Belly? Well, while Antiochus is gathering an army, Fat Belly attacks Ptolemy VI and wins. Very crucially, Ptolemy VI flees to Rome. He survives the battle. Now he's in Rome. And why this is so important is that he recruits Rome as an ally. This will factor in incredibly importantly in the next few verses. So that's important to know. Rome is now an ally against Fat Belly in favor of this other Egyptian king, Ptolemy VI. 29. At the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south. But it shall not be like the former or the latter. What it's saying is, Antiochus went north to gather an army. Then he brings the army south. Last time he brought an army south, he was victorious, right? It's not going to be like that this time. That's what it's saying. 30. At the appointed time, verse 30. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Antiochus comes south with his army and his navy, by the way. Guess who he meets? Rome. Rome's navy is far more powerful than his. Rome's army is far more powerful than his. And yet Antiochus is making his way south into Egypt. Now again, who's now an ally of Egypt? Rome. So as he's making his way south, it looks like he's going to win. The Roman navy defeats him. And his army is stopped by a Roman senator. His name was Gaius Popilius Laenas. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And he's got a contingent of Roman soldiers with him. And he faces Antiochus' army. And he says, Antiochus, you have a choice. You can return home. Or you can continue your war, and you will have declared war on Rome. And Antiochus knows what Rome is all about. He knows he's got no chance against Rome. So what he says to the senator, he says, let me consult with my advisors. Give me some time. And the senator very famously takes a stick and he draws a circle in the sand around Antiochus. And he says, take all the time you need. Just don't leave that circle. Have you ever heard the expression, draw a line in the sand? That's where we get that. Antiochus is humiliated and in front of his troops, no less. He knows he has to retreat from Egypt. Of course, when he heads north, through what country does he have to travel again? Now we have an enraged and humiliated king marching through Israel. As he marches north, he finds that there is a revolt happening. Remember that guy Jason, the high priest who bought the position after Onias was deposed, from whom Menelaus stole the position by offering more money? Well, Jason's out there, and there was a rumor that Antiochus had been killed. So Jason sees his chance. And he starts a civil war against Menelaus. Well, when Antiochus comes home, there's civil war in Israel. The place is a mess. Antiochus goes absolutely wild. Very tragically, he killed, I think, 40,000 Israelites, enslaved people. He begins a program of Hellenizing Israel. He forces paganism on them and begins to commit atrocities, murderous atrocities there. Let's read in verse 31. verse 30, and we'll start in, verse 31. And forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress, and by that you can read the temple. Defile the temple. And they shall take away the daily sacrifices, and place there the abomination of desolation. Antiochus commits a number of atrocities, aside from the murder of tens of thousands of people. Number one, he changed the worship of Yahweh to the worship of Zeus, the main god in the Roman pantheon. He ordered the people of Judea, the Jews, to sacrifice pigs to Zeus. Can you imagine forcing at the point of a sword a Jew to sacrifice a pig, of all things, an unclean animal by the Mosaic law, to a foreign god in Israel at the temple? He forbade the observance of the Sabbath and all Jewish holidays, along with all Mosaic sacrifices. It says he puts an end to sacrifice. He made circumcision illegal. He plundered the wealth of the temple. Now remember, the temple had a treasury. All the people's donations throughout the year. It's phenomenally wealthy. He plundered that wealth. He sacrificed a pig on the altar of the temple. And finally, he erected a statue of Zeus inside the temple area. And that's called the abomination of desolation. Now, have you heard that phrase before? Abomination of desolation? Daniel is predicting this hundreds of years ahead of time. And he's saying that there will come this king of the north, this evil, vile person, who will one day defile the temple. And we know historically how he did it. Sacrificing a pig and putting up the abomination of desolation, the statue of Zeus in the temple. Yet 200 years later, Jesus makes reference to this same prophecy. I'm going to read you a few verses. Start Matthew 24, 15 to 22. This is Jesus speaking 200 years after Antiochus did all this. Jesus says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation. Great tribulation, sound like a familiar phrase? Mm-hmm. Such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. Abomination of desolation. You heard Jesus mention that, right? Yet didn't it happen 200 years earlier, right? When the statue of Zeus was put in the temple by Antiochus? Jesus says there's an even greater fulfillment of that prophecy coming. As you study end times prophecy, you'll get to the book of Revelation. There and elsewhere, you will be introduced to the Antichrist. Right? The Antichrist is going to be a worldwide ruler. He is going to be a political ruler, yet he is going to implement a worldwide religion. And that religion specifically worships him. It is overseen by his sidekick, the false prophet. The false prophet, at a very crucial moment in the rise of the Antichrist, makes some sort of an image, we would call it a statue, that looks like the Antichrist, and puts that in the temple. We read this in Revelation. And the world has to worship this image. People are going to be making pilgrimages to Jerusalem, to God's temple, to worship this statue of the Antichrist. While the Antichrist is around doing business around the world, there's this statue that people are going to be worshiping there. That is the abomination of desolation. Now, if you think about that, how horrifying was it that Antiochus put a statue of Zeus in the temple? How much more horrifying is it that a statue of the Antichrist is one day going to be in the temple, and the whole world is going to be forced to worship it? Had Jesus not come and died for us and rose again from the dead, were it not that we now are the temple of God, right, we would be fighting for that land. Right? But we now know that the sacrificial system was fulfilled and ended in Jesus. Right? So there is no spiritual need for a temple. That does not mean there will not be one. A false one is coming. Right? The Jews are going to rebuild it. Right? But think about it. Had Jesus never come, we would be Jewish. We'd be fighting for that piece of land back, right? Because we would consider it defiled. The Orthodox do consider it defiled. Right? For them, there's a pagan religion up there where they're supposed to be the temple. Right? And that's going to be the impetus for their drive to reinstate the temple, to rebuild it and reinstate sacrifice. And one day, in that rebuilt temple, which 2 Thessalonians tells us must be rebuilt, because it also tells us that the Antichrist is going to walk into that temple, put an end to Jewish sacrifice, declare himself to be God, and put that statue there, the abomination of desolation. So Jesus looks back on Daniel's prophecy, which we know had a fulfillment in Antiochus. And yet then he looks forward and says there's a greater fulfillment even in our future. It's still coming. It's the emplacement of the image of the beast in the temple, and that one day will happen. Now, I say this, it's very interesting that it will happen. I'm fascinated by Bible prophecy and what will happen. In the moment, it's going to be the most horrifying event the world has ever seen. So I don't want to express it as if, hey, isn't this going to be? No, it's horrifying. Now, again, we believe in a pre-tribulational rapture, so we don't think Christians aren't going to be here. But there will be those during this time of tribulation that do get saved, and they're going to have to endure this. Many or most of them will lose their lives, but they'll go to heaven, right? That it's well worth it to lose your life here and go to heaven. Well worth it. But we believe in a pre-tribulational rapture. We believe that the church as we know it now, for any of us who are alive at the time, will be raptured. We won't be here for that. But isn't it interesting that Jesus says there's yet a fulfillment of this abomination of desolation prophecy? Right? It's not just in the past. Will be fulfilled in the future. Verse 32. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by the sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help, but many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, and make them white, until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. Antiochus is ruling violently over Israel. He is forcing the Jews to abandon their faith, to worship pagan gods, to sacrifice pigs to Zeus. He has placed the statue of Zeus in the temple. And he's murdered mercilessly. I don't even want to recount the stories and the ways he was torturing and murdering people. It's not for public consumption. It's so horrible. In the midst of this, there were Hellenists. In other words, there were Jewish people who were sympathetic to Greek culture, who were embracing this. And it says, verse 32, those are the people who do wickedly against the covenant. There are some people who actually sided, some Jews who sided with Antiochus. Right? There were others particularly called the Hasidim, who clung to their religious traditions, and they resisted. They began an underground revolt. Now here's how this happened. In 167 BC, in a small town about 20 miles from Jerusalem called Modin, there was an old Jewish priest. His name was Mattathias Hasmonean, or Hasmonean. He was observing forced pagan worship. The Seleucid soldiers were forcing Jews to worship at a pagan altar. And Mattathias had finally had it. And he went crazy. It is said he was 80 years old. At least that's what I read. Well, at 80 years old, he grabbed one of the soldiers' swords, killed 8 of the soldiers present, and the 2 or 3 Jews who were ready to sacrifice. He just went crazy. That was it. What is this? I can't stands no more. Wasn't there a cartoon or something? It's all I can stands. I can't stands no more. And from his action, a rebellion began. His son, his third son, his name was Judas Maccabeus. Maccabeus means hammer, was his nickname. They began the Maccabean revolt. I don't know if you've heard of that. In the Apocrypha, there is the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, and you can read about their revolt. And they were underdogs. But Judas especially turned out to be a brilliant strategist, and they waged guerrilla warfare. And remarkably, through a series of stunning victories, he actually defeated the Greeks. He defeated Antiochus' army. And for the first time in centuries, Israel was a free nation. There was no outside nation ruling over them. This had not been since before the Babylonian captivity. Because from then it was the Babylonians, then it was the Persians, then it was the Greeks. Now there's a window of time where foreign governance has been overthrown. And the Hasmonean dynasty begins. And they go through a series of historical events there. Until Rome comes in and takes them. By the time Jesus arrives, Rome is the overlord of Israel. But prior to Rome, there was a time, brief period of time, when Israel was a free nation. Now, in the Maccabean revolt, this really was like almost a miraculous victory, because they were outgunned, outmanned, and yet God had mercy on the Jewish people, and they were victorious. It talked about the temple being cleansed. Remember, the temple had been so defiled by pigs on the altar, and the worship of Zeus defiled. So they cleansed the temple. There was a particular priestly rituals that they had, that they would cleanse the temple, making it suitable again for the worship of the true and living God. When they got into the temple to cleanse it, the menorah was lit. Remember the menorah? Candelabra? But by accounts given, there was only enough oil to keep the menorah burning for one day. But again, the story goes, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's got an ancient history, that the menorah actually burned for 8 days. Now, if I say that the menorah, the candelabra, burned for 8 days, does that bring anything to mind? Hanukkah.
It's a Jewish holiday.
The Festival of Lights, which they celebrate for 8 days. Based on this victory that the Maccabees had, and this claim to a miracle that 1 day's worth of oil lasted 8 days. So this is the end of Antiochus and his rule over Israel. From this point on, when we get, and we'll do this next time, when we get into verse 36, the scene is going to change. we're going to begin talking about someone who is not a historical king of the north or a historical king of the south. We're going to begin talking about someone who is future even to us. Antiochus was a picture of this future person. Can you guess who that future person is going to be? The Antichrist. So we are going to learn some things about the Antichrist from Daniel's prophecy. So you see that Daniel saw not just the next few centuries of his people's history. He then sees the end, all the way down in history. In other visions, he's already seen to the end. Christ coming back as a stone not cut with human hands, smashing all the empires of the world to
So
bits.
is Daniel writing all this down? Is that how this became the book of Daniel?
Correct. He wrote down his vision. So next week we'll get into his vision of our future, speaking of the Antichrist, and we'll go into some detail about who this Antichrist character is. So we can learn a little more about him and what to be looking for on the horizon. That is more of chapter 11. And I'm glad you all hung in there with that. There's a lot of historical details there. Prophecy scholars and pastors who teach prophecy will tell you that truly biblical prophecy cannot be understood outside of Daniel. Daniel is like a roadmap into which you fit all other biblical prophecy. Even the coming of Jesus. Remember, Daniel chapter 9 predicted the day Jesus would come, right? And that he would die for this, you know. It's like a roadmap, and then all other prophecy future to Daniel fits in somewhere. So Daniel is something of a cornerstone when you're looking at the biblical scope of prophecy. So we're going to journey on until we get this book done. We're not quitting. So why don't we close it in prayer? Lord, thank you so much. We do appreciate, Lord, you just pushing us through Daniel 11. We do not want to leave a word out of Scripture, Lord. So we, as difficult as it is to get all the historical facts straight, Lord, we are really amazed at what the vision you gave to Daniel, that you predicted his future and our future with astonishing accuracy, Lord. Only you wrote this, Lord. This came directly from you. There's no other explanation. People can argue it. People can deny it. It's from you, Lord. And we know that because of your unique ability to predict the future. We thank you that we can have confidence in your Scripture because of that, especially since your Scripture makes such wonderful promises for our future. We can rest in it.